Go live, da 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 da. Go live, da da dee da dee. Go live, da 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 da. Go live, da da dee da dee. Hello everyone, how are we doing? So, let's start off with something. And I have to admit, I am going to be wearing my headphones when you first see me today, because I'm checking if the sound is coming through okay. Hopefully this will pick up and I'll hear if I've managed to sort out some of the fan issue. Should have done. I don't think I'll have got rid of it completely because of the way this whole room is, and because the way the tower is and everything else around it. So this table picks up far more vibrations and takes far more vibrations than the one I've got at home, which is made up of very nice wood, but it's all wooden joints and it's got no metal in it, etc. And it's very good at deadening the vibrations between it. This picks up the vibrations and amplifies them. Hey! You can hear me and see me. That is good. So if I go quiet on the point now, it's because I'm listening to try and hear for the noise of the fans. You see, the thing is, it's actually coming through more here. It's one of those strange things, it's actually louder on your end than it is in my end. If I take the headphones off, I can hear it. It's the vibrations of the fan going through the table and hitting it. So I've turned down the gain. I've turned the gain down as low as I can, and it still work with my voice when I speak quietly. I've put the. It's on the floor. I had to say that the tower is now on the floor on some carpet, which I brought some carpet tiles with me as part of my packing it. So it's hopefully that's all okay. But as I said, it is actually louder coming through here than it is when I have my headphones off. It's a little quiet relative to my office. I have my headphones set to 50% volume. How's that? Is that better? I've upped the gain just a tad and upped the volume just a tad. That's why I scheduled it for 1/4 beginning. Hopefully that's good. Hi Steve Clarke. Hi Abzaski. Hello Verdun. Hello Seven Croto. Hello Steve Richards. Hello Mark Harkness. Hello Bob Fry. Hello DG40. Hello Paul Emmis. Hello David Golding. Hello Byron Newman. Hello everyone. Oh. Alright. Okay. Hopefully that all works. But the trouble is, it's not the volume of the actual fan volume. As I said, when I take these off, can't hear it. And the computer temperature-wise is running at roughly 41 degrees centigrade. It's the vibration coming through the table. So, now, there's an interesting debate about this battle before we get into it. Because some people go, well, is it really the first battle to be fought with radar? Because, or the first radar influenced battle, because, you know, there was the Battle of Blackett Strait. And the thing is, that's a battle where pretty much you ambush and where a task force, a very large task force in contrast to their opponents, a force of 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers ambush 2 destroyers and sink them. The thing is, that's not considered a fair battle. That's considered an ambush. So whilst it is a battle, and whilst it is the first one which is really radar directed, and you know, you have very similar officers in charge. You have 3 Fletcher destroyers and 3 Cleveland class light cruisers, and you have it all under Admiral Aaron S. Merrill. Hello, you've decided to jump up and say hello. It's a bit too much of a one-sided battle for it to be a battle, if that makes sense. So this is where the interesting thing comes in. The Empress Augusta Bay is a battle. The enemy does fight back. It's still equally damaging for them, because they lose a light cruiser, they lose a destroyer, they have a heavy cruiser damaged, the light cruiser damaged, they have 2 destroyers heavily damaged, they have 25 aircraft shot down, they lose near enough as makes not much difference, 700 experienced sailors and crew. That's not a good scenario for the Japanese. What about Matapan? Well, Matapan is an interesting one to use as a radar battle, because whilst radar does play a part in it, there's also the fact that there's a lot of the pre-World War II British night fighting doctrine in there, where they get as close as they can. They have their guns pointing at it, they keep getting closer and closer, and they wait till the enemy starts to move their guns before they fire at them. And the thing is, whilst it's a radar-facilitated night battle, but it's not really a radar-directed night battle because they get so close. And it's just the point is radar's moving on, as radar is becoming more and more precise, but also more and more viable to be utilised for other things. We have radar, we can tell where the enemy is. Can we direct our gunfire? Not really. We know where they are, we know they're roughly there, we'll find them. We now have precise enough, good enough information coming, we can direct our gunfire. What are you up to? Sorry. I have a poodle. Oh, I know what he's after. I know what you're after. Ugh. 1, 2. That should make you happy. Ah, poodles. So, this is why Augusta Bay comes in as this. And there are a few other contenders as well. But really, this is the first one, definitely the first one for the Americans. It's the first one where we can point to, and we can go, yeah, they are using they're doing all their direction, all their fire control is radar based. They are, literally, you have a radar side versus a non-radar side, and this is what happens. This battle and North Cape, North Cape is even more of an ambush. North Cape is even more of an ambush. And it's a far nastier battle in some regards. And again, if you point to an individual ship in a battle and go, well, they're doing this in this battle, but the thing is, again, is everyone in the battle doing it? So that's, again, the problem when you're sort of pointing it and go to clarification. And this is a whole fun of the year of technology to get into, really. It's a whole fun of discussion. I'm hoping the live streaming is coming through okay. I have excellent connection according to YouTube. The lovely OBS keeps going different colors on me, and yeah, Starlink is more affected by atmospherics. It is more affected by atmospherics. Hi. AC gets a good chunk of the dollars ad money for the ads I had to endure. I'm never quite sure. I get money, but never quite sure how much. And honestly, sometimes I look at some of the comments I get on some of the videos and I go, is that worth the ad money? The people being so annoyed with the comments, and then I go, probably is, at the moment, probably is. When I win a lottery, I'll turn off the ads. Was the radar servo linked to gun control? Not at this point, but there are variations of gun and radar control and radar firing firing tables and firing by radar. And this is sort of one of those battles which builds on previous experiences, including the various commanders, Arleigh Burke's previous experience with radar control. So all those factors are a part of this battle. So this is why we tend to use it as an example of the first all radar battle, because that's what they're all doing. There is one side who is using radar almost exclusively as their fire control and are firing almost completely on radar. So yeah, right. Lee was basically alone. Whilst at Augusta Bay, you already have doctrine. Yes, so pretty much. The difference is you're looking at. There have been. It's when you try and say the first of any battle, especially in terms of technology usage during a massive war like World War II, you're going to have a lot of battles which are building up to it, because that technology is going to be implemented as quickly as it can, which means it's going to be implemented piecemeal. And the doctrine's going to be implemented piecemeal. And it's going to take a while before you get whole units, whole forces, whole structures using that technology, using that doctrine. And that is what we have the case here. That is what Augusta Bay is. So that's why you can call it the first, but you also can't really call it the first. Hello, Leslie Mitchell. First one, how well does radar reduce friendly fire in these night actions? Not that well. The IAFF gear and various other things is not that brilliant. It does reduce it, but I would say it's not as useful as you'd like it to be. I'm not even repeating that, Verdun. Bryce, were there significant differences between the old ships receiving radar versus new ships being built with it? Yes, the way they were built with it, and the way things were included and built into their systems. And the fact that if you think about it, if you're putting into an old ship which hasn't been built with it, you have to retrofit everything to allow it to use it. And often those things are retrofitted in stages, so they might have their first generation radar fit, and then they might have a later radar fit, and does that radar work with all the new gear, and do they have to have a new radar to work with that gear, or does it work with the old gear, do they have to change it? It's far easier when you're building a ship from scratch and you're going, this is the radar we're putting in, these are the systems which work with it, build, and get it to all to work. Sorry. I'm just going to do this. Because, come on, zoom out to me. You should see what is happening next to me. I have a fairly neat and tidy bed, and certain people take it. So if you notice this, and before anyone starts commenting, oh, this bed looks, doesn't look properly made, etc., it was made. It's just someone rolls around on it. And I'm too much of a soft touch where he's concerned to tell him off for it. Anyway. You. I think I had done a video about the Cleveland class. Built to use radar in this time period. Ooh. I would say HMS Vanguard is the only battleship which is really conceived and built around the concept of radar. And you can see that in some of her progress, because despite the fact of the guns she usually has accuracy because of that. But also, that's one of the reasons why she's held up and takes so long to complete, because they want the very best radar fire control for a battleship they can get at the time. He's a poodle. He's wool. Fur doesn't come off him. So, it's fine. It's not just the Americans' ability to learn and adapt. The Japanese had the ability to learn and adapt as well. It's just the Americans had the infrastructure to take advantage of the learning and adaptation, whereas the Japanese didn't. And that's the big problem. I know I sound like a broken record sometimes on the infrastructure thing, but it really does make a difference. You watching me now? Okay. So, the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. Oh yes, I'm going to get bopped. Yeah. Shameless book plug. As you all know, the second edition, the paperback version, is out. And I hope if you want a copy, you can find a copy, because it's very good for me if you can. And if you can't, please keep badgering them and they'll print more. Good boy. Hello. Hello. Yes. Yes. Hello. Yeah. Oh, I think I'm going to get these out of the firing range. Okay. Ay, caramba. You are such a poodle. You are. Good boy. Behave. Right. So, this battle is Task Force 39 of the United States versus the Cruiser Division 5 of the Empire of Japan. And it's part of the Bougainville campaign, portion of the Operation Cartwheel Grand Plan phase of the Pacific War. It's not just a random battle, and that's another reason it's kind of interesting in their prepared forces, because they're not just a random battle. And if you hear any giggling or laughter coming from behind me, I should warn you, the rest of my family are watching Strictly Come Dancing. I don't need them. I only have them so I can check the sound, because I have no speakers on this computer. So the only option I had with me to check them sound was to use my headphones. Brand new, what's the radar display used in this battle? First gen or like movie display type? Now, they did have plot display systems, I think. Hang on. What's that? What? Sorry. He is currently sitting at the base of the cupboard, looking up at the biscuits, going, their bickies are up there. No, you're not getting any. You had your free. Go stay up on the bed and go to sleep. Go on, up you go. stay up there and behave. So, the Bougainville campaign and Operation Cartwheel are all rather interesting as part of World War II. Hey. No. In that it's all about the highway to the Solomon Islands and the highway to the South China Sea and getting into the Japanese area of operations using infrastructure and building your route in. It's also about, to an extent, defending your logistics route. It's about building up the area where the British and American spheres of the war against Japan, the British-led sphere and the American-led sphere, really do start to meet up. And it's also about getting to what is this key part of the Japanese war effort. And the Japanese war effort is all centered in many ways in this area and in many parts of the world on Rabaul. Why? Because Rabaul is, in New Britain, is this really critical location logistically wise. If you can center your forces from there, you can easily support and expand them around elsewhere in the area. You can do major operations from Rabaul. And you can have a really in-depth logistics and infrastructure base set up there. This is, of course, the island of New Britain. It's Australian territory, New Guinea. It's a really cool. It's been around as an important area for quite a while. With it, the Japanese can launch from there and can threaten most of the island chain and head right down to Australasia. Even with their limited logistics, they can support it if they've got a Rabaul to operate from. But the trouble is, to get to Rabaul, you either need to launch all the way across the Pacific Ocean and use pretty much the entire force of the United States and come in and go across. Which the Americans aren't really keen on doing, because they want to do other things. They want to do lots of operations. They don't want to just do one massive operation. They want to do lots of operations. They want to slowly press in on the Japanese. They really do. And the other option is to work your way up the island chain. To use the combined Allied forces available. And the Allied forces are quite significant here. There are Australian troops. There are New Zealand troops. And as I said in Long Patrol, there are both US Marines and US Army. And occasionally, if you read some of their staff notes working together in this period, you would be excused if you didn't realise that they were from the same nation. You would think they were allies rather than from the same nation. They literally, the way they're going on about each other and treating each other. It's not only difference in terms of service, it's difference in terms of mindset and views of the world, almost. But they work together well. And this is where some of the finest amphibious operations of World War II actually take place during this campaign. Now, not always the biggest named and the most well sort of supported, but some of the finest in terms of their actual achieving their goals. And actually providing some really sensible, really useful information to think about how to do future amphibious operations. Because the trouble is, a lot of the bigger set-piece battles of amphibious warfare that are well known and resonate down through history and we talk about, they are massive occasions, but they're also unique products of their circumstances and geostrategic nature and the context of what's going on in them. Whereas these battles, this series of battles, are rather, how do I put this, replicable. There are scenarios where you find yourself going, well, really, we'd like to be landing this island with 3 divisions at 3 different points. But we only have 1 division and 2 brigades available. Okay, what should we do with them instead? How do we land them? Where do we land them? What kind of operation do we do? What do we work through in these formations? What are we doing? And if you look at the sort of some of these formations, the similar formations keep showing up for a reason. They keep being reused, and sometimes the pace of operations is literally being set by How quickly can a division go from front landing, carry out its combat operations, pacify an island, be reconstituted, repaired, and then deployed again? If you look there, is a good example. Operation Toenails, we have the 43rd Infantry Division in the United States. They are landed there on the 30th of June in New Georgia on 30th of June 1943. We then plot down and go, oh, hang on, they turn up again in Arundel Island on 27th of August 1943. That's where they turn up again. And then if we look down the rest of the list, well, Arundel Island obviously takes quite a long time and requires quite a lot of work. Because they don't pop up again. And it's not a surprise, because when you look at the Arundel Island on this operation, you look at its place, and you look at where they are, you go, oh, that makes sense. So, there you go. Now, our operation we're talking about today, we're talking about the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, takes place to do with the wonderfully named Operation Cherry Blossom. Are you hiding up there from your brother? You think he's going to hurt you again? He can't get through a door. We've been over this. Corgis are very smart, but they can't get through a door. Corgi, stop trying to run away from the Strictly Come Dancing. You volunteered for that job. You two had the choice of which way you go. You went to Strictly. You can't renege on it now. Corgis. They always volunteer for the sequins, and then after a while they go, no, we want to run away. Now, this is the point, therefore. This operation is about, from the American side, it's about covering amphibious landings, about supporting amphibious landings, about amphibious movement. It's not about covering for a major carrier battle group. It's not about carrying out a major forward tasking. It's not about driving the Japanese back. It is about covering amphibious operations. It's even worse when you get into it, because you realise that actually the Japanese, when they're turning up, are turning up when the Americans have already left. The amphibious operation is pretty much over. The Americans are landed. They ain't going anywhere. 3rd Marine Division is in place in Bougainville. They ain't going anywhere. Sorry, did the tribals ever use radar? That's off today's topic, but yes, the tribals used radar quite a lot. If you, in the discussion of Ile-de-Basse, they used radar and did all that sort of battle in defense of the D-Day force, and they tribal class were the first destroyers, pretty much the first destroyers in the Royal Navy fitted with radar, as quickly as they could be. They had radar and used it fairly successfully. They were some of the first to be fitted with the plot display systems, and there's a whole discussion in my book about it, because there is a debate as to whether or not the Canadians were fitted with it or not at the Battle of Ile-de-Basse, and the fact is, it's possible they weren't, but it's possible they were. Yeah, we occasionally have some fun things happen with the connection, but it seems to be okay, broadly speaking. It seems to be, broadly speaking, okay. Tonight, I do apologise, it is running through Starlink. Hello. Is that your dinner arriving? Oh, he gets served dinner in my bed. Not even dinner in bed. He gets served dinner in my bed. Seriously, if reincarnation is real, I want to come back as one of you. So, now we set the scene for what the battle is doing. It's all about the 3rd Marine Division. It's all about what's being landed. It's all about this campaign. Let's move on. So let's consider the organisation of South Pacific Force at the inception of Task 1. And please note, yes, I have nicked the chart, as it was originally, from an American source, hence organisation with a Z rather than an S. Now, the pictures I edited myself, so I'm not sure if that makes this my own work or it makes it a fudged work, but it's something I've been using for a few years, this slide. Because I put in, as I found officers and I found decent pictures of them, of course. I don't, Nimitz is easy. Halsey's easy. You can find decent pictures of those. They're relatively easy to find. Finding decent pictures of the various officers below that's more difficult. That is a lot more fun. Now, we're looking here, mainly we're talking about sort of the amphibious operation, amphibious forces, because that's the really senior officer wandering around when we're talking about this battle taking place. Actually, Halsey's nowhere nearby. So the senior officer wandering around somewhere nearby is Turner, who is probably one of the best amphibious warfare specialists in World War II. I mean, it's between him and You then have the naval forces under Gormley. That's a cool name. You have the army forces under Millard Harmon, who is a very, very good senior officer. It's another time where you sit there and go, if you have Millard Harmon around, how is it you end up with MacArthur in the senior post you do? Hello. Is there something we want? Okay. There is something we want. Okay. Well, perhaps the same person who fed you biscuits can sort out these needs. Yes, I'm getting them. I'm not doing it in a way. I'm not going to disturb Strictly Come Dancing for you. I love you dearly, but I do not want to die for you over the point of disturbing Strictly Come Dancing. I like my limbs attached to my body. This is off-topic conversation for everyone, but yeah. Anyone else getting cod at random times? Circle of Doom. Yeah, that's probably caused by signal degradation at some point in the atmosphere. There is occasional signal degradation happening due to, well, just due to the quality of signal, I guess. I'm using Starlink tonight. First one, if the Empress Augusta Bay had been placed at Savo, how well would they most likely have done? That would have been a very different battle for the Battle of Savo, because they would have, if this you're talking about this force, Battle of Savo, they would have interesting advantages over most their predecessors. So MacArthur has pretty much nothing to do with this operation. You then have South Pacific Aircraft, land-based, which is under Grandad McCain, as I like to call him, or Admiral John S. McCain Sr. Then you have the South Pacific Island bases and the South Pacific Squadron Service, who, well, they're kind of an interesting scenario, and working out whether it's Aubrey Fitch is in charge or Mason. No! Leave my pillows alone. Okay. That's it. Nope. If you're going to misbehave, well, don't. I will now give away the law. Nope. I can obey. You behave. Apparently I now have a corgi, so there's been a changing of the fluffy guard. Hello. Yeah, the corgi was coming to tell him off. Ah! Oh! Hello. Oh, hello. Oh, he spotted food. Oh, must get to the food. Must get to the food. Ah, caramba. So, where is Lee? All those big names are off in other places doing other things, but actually that doesn't really matter to us. These are the senior officers who are directing the fight. None of them are nearby. Stop doing what your brother's doing. You're just rolling in the bed. Okay, I'll accept that. Oh, you're gonna argue back. Come here. He's on the bed.
He's alright, is he?
He's fine. Yes, you heard Woof. He's fine. Sorry, they're worried. They heard Corgi Woof and they're going, hang on, do we have to remove him as well? No, he's fine. He's behaving. So, that's the senior command, but none of those are anywhere nearby. This is very much not the top team in terms of taking command of this battle. It's very much not the superstar officers, the officers whose names have, well, barring one of them, have gone down in generations. Although, actually, quite a lot of them do deserve to have gone down in generations. The purpose of this battle is to protect the 3rd Marine Division. They have landed. They have landed. And their supplies, though, are still there. And some of them have actually left. And we'll talk about that as we get on with the battle. But the fact is, the Japanese are actually dispatched and en route after the American amphibious forces have pretty much already gone. They've turned up, they've landed, they've left. There are some supply ships there still dropping off, but the landing ships have gone. This is how well Turner has got his forces cooperating and working together. The forces turn up, they've dropped it off, they've gone. By the time you turn up and respond, they're no longer there. The troops are ashore. That was my sister, yes. Hello. You want to lick my arm? Okay. So what are the Americans doing? Well, the Japanese are trying to intersect this. It's rather kind of reminiscent of Force Z. It's instead of the British trying to interdict the Japanese trying to interdict the American landing forces. And they've sent out surface ships again to do it, because that's your option. That's the best option. If you can get some surface ships amongst the amphibious forces, they will decimate them. Remember, that's the big fear for D-Day. That's the big fear for all sorts of amphibious operations. If you can get your surface forces amongst amphibious forces, you can cause horrendous amounts of trouble. Horrendous amount of trouble. And they are trying to do that. And the result of what happens to them is the Americans hear them coming. They spot them coming. They move to intercept them, to stop them interfering even with the offload. They're not even getting the empty supply ships which are just about to move out, the four that stayed behind. They run into this force which ambushes them because they're coming along, proceeding almost in their travelling formation, and they run headfirst into the Americans, who of course know exactly where they are. The landing wasn't covered by carriers. They weren't considered necessary. There were land-based aircraft in range. And when does that ever happen in naval warfare? When does it ever go to plan? It does happen in naval warfare. It has happened. There have been operations where ships have gotten involved in them. If you consider, there have been actually exercises. Are you trying to climb up my shoulder again? Oh, no, I'll win. I'll win. I'm your papa. There was an exercise. You climbed up my shoulders, made me forget the name of the exercise. If I look it up. Exercise Tiger is a good example, but there are a few other scenarios where that happened. It's enough of a nightmare scenario, and it's not easily worked out to be enough of a nightmare scenario that frankly navies are having nightmares without it actually having happened too often, because most of them do their best to prevent it happening. I'm trying to tussle me. Oh, good lord. I'm getting good ear licking. So, for the Japanese, if they can intercept the Marine Division, if they could have intercepted the Marine Division, they could have wiped out a major formation very quickly. Because if we consider landing ships, they're not designed to receive 8-inch shells, they're not designed to receive torpedoes, they're not designed to receive any of that kind of fireworks. I said, why did I say fireworks? Fossil fireworks, anything that firepower, they're not designed to receive that. What they are designed to do is land. So if you don't have, how to put this, if you let the enemy get in any close to you, you will lose those ships because they can't protect themselves. And as fast as you will try to take out the enemy ships, they'll be able to take out these logistic ships a lot quicker. And the trouble is then your own escorts are going to be dealing with trying to recover, trying to save lives, as much as fight back the enemy. And that means they themselves will get open up to being attacked. So it's a nightmare scenario before it even happens. You're both very active today, aren't you? Yes, you are. Hello. So, the balance of forces for the US Navy: Montpelier, Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver. 4 Cleveland-class light cruisers, with the latest radar fits and a lot of 6-inch guns, plus a lot of 5-inch 38s. So they are very well armed and very capable. Consider them not quite the machine gun cruisers that the Atlantas and the Didos were, in terms of, you know, massing their firepower and being able to get out that volume, but they're not far off it. They are certainly not something you want to upset, because they will fire a lot of shells at you very quickly. And they're backed up. They're under command of Rear Admiral Aaron S. Merrill, who I'll be getting into a bit, but he is just as much of a radar, gunnery, fighting expert as Lee is. He's far less known than Lee is, because he doesn't get to do it with battleships. He gets cruisers for his job. But he was in charge at the Battle of Blackett. I always get the second part straight. I always want to say Blackett's sound, but it's straight. I know it's not sound. He was in command of Blackett Strait, and he's in command here. You have under him, you have Destroyer Squadron 23, which is Captain Arleigh Burke's Destroyer Squadron. Now, that's operating in its divisional strengths formation. So pretty much, you have, because of the complexity of the battle, you have Arleigh Burke in charge of Charles, Osborne, Dyson, Stanley, and Claxton, and they're off on one position. And you have Spence, Thatcher, Converse, and Foote under the then Commander Bernard Aston, who was another eventual superstar of the US Navy and is probably one of the key, if not the most key personality to developing most of the modern system which guides the education of US naval officers to this day. There it is, 48 6-inch rapid guns. Pretty much. That's a lot of firepower. It is, and it's... You can't see it, but I'm currently having my hand chased around by a corgi. So what is this force about? Well, it's all balanced, and it's all rather the same. If you consider that's 8 Fletcher-class destroyers and 4 Cleveland-class light cruisers. So they're all pretty much the same. And they are 2 homogeneous units combined for this joint operation. Okay? You're getting Strictly again. You tried to escape, but you got too excited. Flew too close to the sun, mighty Fluff. Flew too close to the sun, mighty Fluff. Actually, wonderful here. I can neaten up the bed. So that will stop annoying me. It's always good when it stops annoying you. Right. So, with this homogeneous force, that makes life very easy from a coordination perspective. If you give an order, you know they can all do the same. They're all from the same group. So, those destroyers are all much of a similarity. They are all of a similar generation. They're all of a similar capability. Yes, Fletchers were heavily modified by their crews and were differential in terms of some of the yards would have slightly differences in them, but they're broadly speaking the same. They're built to the same levels, the same capabilities. Broadly speaking, they are the same. It's the same with the Cleveland class. They're built in different yards, but they are built to the same core design and with the same core capabilities. Yes, there are differences because, well, every yard has a slight variation. I mean, you only have to... the usual good example to put for the differentiations is to start to hunt for things like galley spaces. They're theoretically all supposed to be exactly the same. Galley spaces often have quite a high degree between different yards of individualism. Especially in some of the range of equipment put in there. They will have, broadly speaking, the required equipment that's required, but it might be of, well, this will come from this manufacturer and this manufacturer, which have slightly different dimensions than the stuff which came from a different manufacturer, and so forth. So, Richard, the wife would like to know why you aren't in the office. Well, I'm not in the office because, as you all know, there have been issues at home recently with making my mum and sister ill. So, I've brought them down to Cornwall for a month. I'm not staying down here for a month. I'm going backwards and forwards up to home. But probably Thursday and Sundays you will see me in this for November. But it's all sorts of fun things, but it's basically to try and help them with their health. I've decamped and set up a Starlink-based office in a bedroom, kind of returning to the beginning of this channel, which was done from my bedroom at home. which is fun and slightly depressing. They didn't have the same issues with torpedoes by this point. By this point, the Fletchers and their torpedoes are fairly good and fairly reliable. How can I say that one? Well, the Mark 15 torpedo has an interesting history, similar to sort of the Mark 14. And at certain points, the advantage for destroyer crews versus submarine crews is they get to do a lot more practice firing, they get to do a lot more testing, and they get to do a lot more work with it. There were lots of problems with the early war-built Mark 15s, including zinc being used instead of cadmium. For the zinc instead of cadmium, not the other way around, for their interior plating and various things. But by the time you get to 1943, in terms of August 1943, Chester Nimitz has threatened to do enough nasty things to enough people that many of the issues have been resolved, and many of the the systems being used from about June 1943 onwards are much better. Issues are not completely fixed till November 1943, but yeah, that was famously sorted when Thomas Kincaid, in charge of 7th Fleet, which was of course in the Southwest Pacific area, basically, how do I put this politely, took Ralph Waldo Christie, metaphorically, who was the Rear Admiral in charge of various things, outside and whacked him over the head and ordered him to tell his submarine and destroyer captains to disable the magnetic detonators and put in the fix for the contact pin. But that wasn't a problem in this area. This is the South Pacific Command. So this is Halsey's area, which comes directly under Nimitz. And Nimitz has been trying to fix things very, very quickly. And if you have proactive officers like Merrill and Burke in charge, who are listening and who are very technically minded, and Austin as well, you find that these forces tend to get fixed more quickly. In fact, if we get into the actual commanders, and that would be useful to do, and that is what we will do with the next slide, and me bring up my next set of notes. It's always good to bring up my next set of notes. Sorry. Now, the pictured here on 23rd of December in 1943, so not long afterwards, is Rear Admiral, the then Rear Admiral, Admiral Aaron S. Merrill. Now, he's also known as Tip Merrill, and he was the first admiral to solely use radar for fire control during wartime. For fire control, not finding the enemy. Radar-assisted discovery, radar-assisted targeting, radar-assisted target location. That's all come before. But refer to solely using radar fire control and not having any visual confirmation at all, that does go to Aaron Stanton Merrill. Now, he'd been born in 1890. Think about that. He was born in 1890. So, in 1943, he is 53 years old. His commands have been the Harvard, the Elcano, the Williamson, the Pensacola, Destroyer Division 8, the USS Indiana, and, well, various other quite interesting positions. But principally the Bougainville Command is an interesting post for him because he'd completed the senior course at Naval College in 1938 to 39. And between 39 and 40, he commands the division, as I mentioned, Destroyer Division 8, where his flagship is the USS Somers. So he's worked on modern destroyers. He understands them. He then goes and becomes Professor of Naval Science and Tactics at Tulane University. He does that for roughly 2 years. Then he's given the command of the Indiana. So he spent a lot of time thinking through science and tactics. He spent a lot of time working on it. As such, he is very much in favor of a lot of technology. He's very keen on radar. If you were looking at officers, if Lee didn't exist, the person who'd probably be in Lee's role would probably be Merrill. This is the really interesting thing. Admiral Ching Lee is one of these great examples of really superstar, really good at their job admirals. But the thing is, they can obscure that just below them are often some very, very good admirals as well, who just aren't quite as great. Merrill is a good example of this. He's not quite on the same level as Ching Lee, but he's really, really good. Then you have this. The face he's pulling can only mean it's 1 point. That is the picture of Captain Arleigh Burke when he's Chief of Staff to Mark Mitscher. Mitscher and Burke had an interesting relationship. They were actually quite good friends, I always believe, by the end of it. And he'd actually served as Mitscher's Chief of Staff until Mitscher died. So I think they were good friends. But what is he before this? He's a very hard charging officer. He is famous for a few points, One of the quotes he has is that the difference between a good officer and a bad officer is 10 seconds. It's after one of the first night battles he's involved in. And it's the Battle of Blackett Strait. That's why this is one of those reasons why that battle doesn't get the first radar battle in terms of its title. Because for Burke, when his radar operator makes first contact, he hesitates to fire. He hesitates to fire because he's not sure whether it's friend or foe. So he asks an ensign what the difference was between a good officer and a poorer one. Or rather, a bad one. It depends on the quote whether it's a poor or a bad one. And the ensign tries to give a nice response. I'm sure the ensign's response, which doesn't fully go down in history, was straight out of the academy, what a good officer is, straight out the manual, perfectly by rote. And you can just imagine, this ensign is saying this 20-year-old maximum, possibly 18-year-old ensign, is saying this to this senior captain, this already a legend in his own lifetime, 42 years old, must look sort of twice their age, must look goodness knows how intimidating from that ensign's perspective. And so that responds to it and goes, difference between a good officer and a poor one, or a bad one, is about 10 seconds. Now, I was interesting because I sort of loaded the way I phrased the question about that in the long patrol. And the interesting thing about doing a long patrol before the live is I get to consider the comments in long patrol. And I have to say, most of you come to the same perspective as I do, is that you have very little time to make a decision. You have to take enough time to make the right decision. But you have to make the right decision. But the thing is also, you always have to remember there is this factor in warfare where hesitation kills. The old quote is from artillery, but it no less stands true in naval warfare. When you're dealing with weapons usually of a version of artillery, let's be honest. Where if an officer makes the wrong decision, they'll lose troops. If they make the right decision, they'll lose troops, but less. If they sit there in one place with their troops in one place, trying to make up their mind as to what decision to do, they'll lose the most troops, because whilst they're thinking and working out what to do, the enemy knows exactly what to do. There's a concentration of troops. We fire artillery, and artillery is always the biggest killer of anyone in war. Now, the other interesting thing is there's about 3 different versions, of which 2 I trust, on why he gets his title of 31 Knot Burke. There's the view that was originally a taunt, because during the Battle of Cape St. George, one of his ship's boilers wasn't working properly, the USS Spence. It was blocked by a brush used for cleaning, is how it's traditionally phrased, which limited his squadron to 31 knots, rather than the 34-ish they normally did. There's a couple of holes with that, which in a live with time I'll get into that. One, if you have left a brush inside a boiler, it's going to do a lot more issues than just limit you to 31 knots. Because, let's be honest, if it's left inside a tube with high pressure steam rolling through, all sorts of interesting things can happen with that brush. I mean, all sorts of things can happen with that brush. But it still could be the case, but there again, if you want your squadron to... probably, if you've got a ship with that level of engine difficulty, and you might well send it back. But it's still potentially true. It's potentially they were keeping going as fast as they could, without raising the maximum pressure for fear of what the brush would do inside the boiler. Because remember, if that brush decided to go really fast and somehow managed to poke a hole in a aforementioned boiler, then that would clean the engine room out very quickly. But there is that quote in the biography of Eisenhower, which comes from there, but other sources as well, which are sources which were politically connected, seem to have resolved around this thing. And during World War II, Burke led his squadron into a Japanese minefield. Halsey radioed to ask what he was doing in a Japanese minefield, and Burke replied 31 knots. So not quite as fast as he could go, but but hoping to get out there. And there is actually some sound reasoning behind that, some sound logic. There was an idea that if you went fast enough, you could get through a minefield. Some destroyer commanders, even in World War II, still did believe this, that if you went fast enough, you could ride your bow wave through the minefield, and the bow wave would deal with all the mines. There are various versions of this, and various versions of those two stories. So I think myself, if I had to pretend one, I prefer the one of the response of 31 knots being his response to a minefield. Because to me that sounds kind of like Burke. He did like to be irreverent. And then we have Austin. Austin. He is another one who goes on to have a highly academic career. He had been served as part of Gormley's detachment and as Special Naval Observer, negotiating the operational technical details of cooperation between the Royal Navy and the US Navy in 1940, in the event the US entered World War II. He was actually the only member of Gormley's mission other than Gormley who was able to attend every meeting, including meeting Winston Churchill and Admiral Sidney Bailey. And it was while he was posted to the embassy in the UK that the US entered World War II. And that was while he was still a senior lieutenant, because he wasn't made a lieutenant commander until August 1942. And by November 1942, he was a commander. He took part in Operation Torch. He took part in all sorts of little operations and ended up, of course, in the Pacific in the brand new USS Foote as Commander Destroyer Division 46, which was part of the famed Little Beavers. Yes, that is Destroyer Squadron 23's nickname, the Little Beavers. I managed to avoid that in the long patrol. I managed to avoid mentioning that, but you know, we try. Desron 23 did actually receive a Presidential Unit citation during World War II for extraordinary heroism, and that was for their action against Japanese forces during the Solomon Islands campaign from November 1st, 1943 to February 23rd, 1944. So this battle that we're talking about, the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, is the beginning of that period which earns them the Presidential Unit citation. He ended up getting promoted to Commodore in pretty much because of his service. In 1943, December 1943, he took command of Destroyer Squadron 14, and he was promoted to Commodore after the Solomons, and sort of ends up in 1944 as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations and Training on the staff of Commander Destroyers United States Pacific Fleet, which is a nice long title for saying he's the one who's actually running the training and organising for destroyers in the Pacific. And so, from that point onwards, he is responsible for the quality of destroyers which come out, the crews, etc., which come out in the Pacific. From April 1944 onwards, if a destroyer comes into service in the US Navy in the Pacific Fleet, he's going to be in charge of making sure it's good. He then, in June 1944, became the Assistant Chief of Staff for Administration to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, that's Nimitz, and remained in that post until August 1945. He then goes to the Chief of Naval Office of the Chief of Naval Operations in the Department of Navy, Washington. If you're starting to see a pattern here, this is a guy, and this is him up here, who is supremely competent at naval administration about politics as well as leadership. In a nicest way, in any other scenario with any other generation officers, he would probably be who you'd be looking at to become his equivalent of a CNO. The CNO. He probably would have, in any other scenario, without the officers around him who they were, he would have been Chief of Naval Operations. He officially retires as a Vice Admiral, but he spends quite a long period prior to that, from 1960 onwards, as the President of Naval War College, and serving as President of various boards of inquiry. He is a very trusted, very safe set of hands. And this is the thing: is he's technically he's technically retired in 1967, but in 1968 he's ordered to return to active duty again, and he is assigned to the United States Atlantic Fleet to serve as president of the Board of Inquiry investigating the disappearance of the submarine, the USS Scorpion. He'd already served as the president of the Board of Inquiry looking into the loss of the USS Fresher. In fact, in many ways, Austin becomes the number one thorn in the side of various members of the US submarine service, because he goes through and actually checks that they've been doing what they've been saying they'd be doing. And he's very thorough, and he's not an officer you can turn around and go, well, you don't have the fighting experience. Excuse me, I was in the unit which had Presidential Unit citation. They only destroyers too. I've been in combat. I've fought the battles. Okay, well, you don't have academic experience. I'm president of the Naval War College. Okay, well, you don't understand the staff contract. Excuse me, seen the amount of staff I've run in during World War Two? It's just, he's the triple whammy of naval officers. And as said, it should probably have been CNO. And as you'll see in this battle, this is really. These are not. Arleigh Burke goes on to, because he goes on to become Chief of Naval Operations and does all the stuff he does. But they are not as well known collectively as they should be, and they are not at the forefront, but they are very skilled officers, and this is part of the reason you're saying this is so lucky at this point. They have a huge depth of reliable officers who are very professional and really do understand what they're doing. Oh, thank you. So, do you think having the right kind of modern ships in this war, this was a factor in this battle? It is a factor, but I think if you don't have the crews to use them, they're not going to be helpful. Hello, everyone. So, we've looked at the Americans. Let's consider the Japanese. Well, the Japanese are different. The Japanese force structure is very different. And the Japanese command structure is very different. You have the two heavy cruisers, who are of course both Myoko class. You have Agano and Sendai, who are both lead ships of their own class of light cruisers, so the light cruisers aren't the same. And you have a whole mixture of destroyers. You have, I think, you have three Shiratsu destroyers. You have Naganimi was a Yugamo class destroyer, Hatsugaze was a Kangaroo class destroyer, and Wakatsuki was an Akizuki class destroyer. So, very different automatically from the US naval formation, which is literally, we have 4 Clevelands and 8 Fletchers. Boom! This one, we have 2 Myoko class heavy cruisers, we have an Agano class light cruiser, Agano, a Sendo class light cruiser, Sendai. And then we have 3 different destroyers, which are 3 different classes, and then we have 3 Shiratsu class destroyers. And each of the formation, instead of it being standardized off for its movement operations, you have the 2 heavy cruisers in the center, roughly. And you have a port and starboard, left and right screen, depending on how you translate the Japanese. So I'm going to go left and right because that's more of a accurate translation than port and starboard, although port and starboard would be how we talk about naval terms. In terms of the terminology translation, it's left to right, left and right. Although, yeah, port, left, starboard, right. So, you know, hey ho. Each one was based on a light cruiser and 3 destroyers. So automatically, you already have a lot more problems going on there, because you don't just have the coordination of 4 ships, you have the coordination of 3 destroyers, which might not be even the same as each other, and a light cruiser. And then you have each of those two groups are different groups, different combinations, and they're coordinating with 2 heavy cruisers. Now, initially, they'd also added 5 destroyer transports, which were full of troops for a counter landing, but they would, because of delays in this force moving, and as said, this force will only start really entering the theatre of operations after the amphibious force has already left. They'd already sent them back to Rebel, so there's going to be no counter landing anymore. And that would have been an interesting difference from 4Z, because that would have been a counter landing, would have really added some fun to it. But there again, those 5 ships would probably have been included in the battle that takes place, and then 5 ships laden with not carrying torpedoes, not carrying other systems to carry as many troops and act as fast transports as they can, would probably have been sitting targets for the Cleveland class. It sounds like a scratch force trapped together. Exactly. It does sound like a scratch force trapped together because that is what the Japanese are doing at this point. You know, World War II is... World wars are always infrastructure conflicts, okay? Small wars, you can get away with tech advantages, all sorts of things. If it's a small, short war, you can make the movements. But the moment you're into a world war, the moment you're into a global conflict, something which is going to be a multi-year war, it's all about infrastructure and construction. And if we consider, yes, the British are putting together sometimes not homogeneous formations of destroyers, but they're usually reinforcements tacked onto other destroyer groups, and they work up together. And usually it's not a quick thing. They're not put together and then you're going to combat in a few hours. You've never worked together before. This is different. You know. Thank you, Verdun. You just bought some. I just got a notification that you bought. You sent me a Ko-fi donation, so for some couple of a bottles of Iron Brew. That's rather helpful. Considering how much this month is going to cost me, that's rather helpful. But hopefully, it does the things for my mum's health. I'm not looking forward to rail replacement bus services, which I have to use at least once. For anyone who's not in the UK. Rail replacement bus services are a nightmare. They can go all sorts of places. So, the Japanese have a problem, therefore. In this scenario, it requires your command team to be really good, really at the top of their game, really understand each other to be able to get the best out of such a mixed force. I mean, they have to understand each other perfectly. Unfortunately, you have Sentaro Omori, who's technically a rear admiral but being used as an admiral at this point. There is all sorts of weird things going on here. I'm not getting into that one. There's a debate as to whether he's still a rear admiral, but he's acting as senior rear admiral to the rear admirals Matsuji and Osugi. But later on, he is confirmed as an admiral, and he seems to skip certain points. It's just weird. Okay, let's just get into it. Then you have Matsuji Injuin, who is, how do I put this politely? Well, he's technically a baron, so he is connected with a capital C, including, if you've watched my Chiefs of Staff of the Axis Navy series, you will be familiar with Prince Fushimi Hiroyoso. Oh, good lord. Well, he'd been aide-de-camp to him in the 1930s, so yeah, he was connected with a capital C and had received promotions because of it. But yeah, they're not the how do I put this politely? They're not the really interesting one in this battle. And actually, I would like to please put out a thank you to the world, because Morikazu Osugi, I was looking for sources for him, and it was really difficult to find decent, detailed sources about him. Really difficult. I'd found a couple myself, but it was really quite difficult. And so I did what most sensible academics do these days, in that Wikipedia is not used as a source itself, because we don't know who's edited. No one's taking responsibility. No one's taking ownership. That's the whole thing with academic works and judgment of reliability. Has someone taken ownership for if this is wrong, their head's on the line? So, yeah. There are lots of good people out there. There's lots of good stuff in Wikipedia. It's always an interesting idea to go and read, but you can't cite it, you can't use it. But you can use it for one thing. Go and mine the sources. So I went hunting for it. There isn't an English language page about him. Okay. There is an Italian one, though. The Italian Wikipedia has it. And, of course, translate means that automatically gets translated. So, what I found out was there are good sources about him. And I honestly didn't want to know some of those sources about him. Because he did not do good things. I have talked about him in other scenarios in another video, which is why I'm not getting into this in this time, because when I was talking about the various bad things which were done in World War II to various sailors and scenarios a few weeks ago, I think, or maybe months ago actually that video was, he is of course the admiral who orders people to be killed. He's also the one who ends up possibly taking his own life, although it's kind of interesting because how do I put this politely? He's found guilty of killing 13 airmen. He's sentenced to life in prison and hard labour in Sagumo prison. But 10th of December, he's placed on the list of retired officers in 1946. And on the 28th of August 1948, his death is reported. Now, some sources state that he was executed that day, but the documents of the court are all talking about life imprisonment, not execution. They're all life imprisonment. And the Americans didn't have a habit of executing people without documentation because they knew that could get them into trouble, especially under the scenario they were in Japan at the time, and the need for Japan to be an ally against the Soviet Union. And that's what they were sort of changing it over to in the sort of 1948 period. So the common suspicion is that he finished himself, and to cover that up and preserve honor, that's where the execution idea comes from. But it's all a bit mysterious and iffy. So, let's look at these officers. Omori started World War II in Commander Destroyer Squadron 1. Now, he'd been promoted to a Rear Admiral in November 1940. And this is what you start talking about, because you start going, well, he's a destroyer commander. He's the equivalent of Arleigh Burke in 1940, and he's a Rear Admiral. Your destroyer squadrons are commanded by Rear Admirals? Why? Because you start to expect a certain level of independence of thought and action of officers. And the Japanese, instead of allowing more junior officers to exercise that, prefer to put admirals in charge. That's their modus operandi. So whereas in the Royal Navy and the US Navy, you regularly find captains, commanders in charge of destroyer squadrons and flotillas in terms of Royal Navy terminology, that would be considered quite normal. In the Japanese, you'd find a Rear Admiral. Now, he took part in the occupation of Attu Islands, in the Battle of the Aleutian Islands. During the Midway Battle, he took also part in the Indonesian raid in 1942, in charge of Destroyer Squadron 1, and then he's given command of Cruiser Division 5. So he has command of Cruiser Division 5. Now, technically, he becomes Commandant of the Torpedo School and is promoted to Vice Admiral in July 1944. But he also seems to be Admiral in charge of operations. So he's sometimes termed as Admiral in terms of or Admiral in charge of task forces or operations. There's a discussion going on in its various books. Helpfully, though, the book I had, when I was getting into this in quite a lot of detail, is one of the couple of books which I forgot to bring with me. If I just borrow this for a second. Yeah, I have a full of books. But helpfully, that was one of the books I forgot. So, yeah, that's annoying. It is annoying. But life happens. And he is therefore in charge, but he also seems to be sort of demoted, because he's relieved for command for having withdrawn from Empress Augusta Bay in the face of what was considered inferior forces. Don't get me started on that. The Japanese actually do believe Osugi when he claims that they were actually fighting inferior forces rather than superior forces. And claims that they were sinking them. And the Japanese High Command actually believes Osugi. Osugi manages to do all sorts of weird things in this battle, and I'll be getting into it. He pretty much destroys some of his own ships because of his own aggression and own stupidity, for want of a better phraseology. He just can't control his aggression. The whole thing of being a destroyer officer at this period is you're supposed to be aggressive. But uncontrolled aggression is uncontrolled or unchanneled aggression is counterproductive. It doesn't help. It causes problems. It causes more problems than good. And that is the trouble. Osugi is a prime example of someone who is so overflowing with aggression and desire to get at the enemy, he doesn't actually think through what he's doing. And it's interesting enough, sort of, Injuan is probably, of the three, one of the best. His vessel is one of the vessel he's aboard. The Sendai is one of the ones that actually is sunk. But he would be actually killed later in the war when his then flagship, the patrol boat Iki, is torpedoed and sunk in May 1944 north of Saipan. He's posthumously promoted to a vice admiral. It's really quite sad because some of the better commanders of the Japanese forces get lost in silly, silly ways. And some of the ones who are just I'm going to use this phrase, but I know it's not quite right, but I can't think of a better phrase for it. So if anyone has a better phrase or suggestion for it in the chat, please do. Poster boys for a kind of Japanese martial philosophy, which is attacking and mindlessly keep attacking will win the day, get promoted and survive. So, we either have a scenario where we have 3 rear admirals in charge, which really makes it problematic, or we have 2 rear admirals and a senior officer who gets demoted, but may not have been even officially promoted, but was acting in a more senior capacity, in charge. It's basically a entire, how do I put this politely? So you have a complicated scenario to begin with because of the ships, and then you add on a command structure which is rife for disagreement and rife for people doing what they want and saying, well, no, I don't have to take orders from you, you're the same rank as me. And yeah, it goes bad. It goes really bad. Basically, when you're talking about certain scenarios with the Russian Navy, if I did the Battle of Tsushima, etc., I'll be saying, and then it gets worse, and then it gets worse, and then it gets worse. Well, in this scenario, basically the Japanese motto throughout World War II is, and then we managed to make it more complicated. And they just keep making it more and more complicated, and they can't understand why things aren't working. And I seriously think the biggest problem with the Japanese Navy in World War II is that none of them had ever learned the KISS principle. Now, because cousins are watching, that's going to be keep it simple, silly. Although I suppose I can say stupid. I've already said that today. So keep it simple, stupid. It just keep it simple. They don't. When they do, some of their operations, when they do manage to keep it simple, do work disturbingly well and really do catch the Allies off foot. But the trouble is, they don't naturally keep it simple. So, that's the Japanese, and that's the American command structures. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat now, because in the next discussion, we are diving into the battle. So, I've done all the background and all the context, so I can now explain the stuff without having to explain all that. I'm just going to sit here and sort of watch the chat a second. No, I do not want to insert ads. I do not want to insert ads. So, hang on, just check the chat. It's still working. No questions come through, but no questions have come through for the last 20 minutes. This is worrying me. So, is it the dock isn't working? Yeah, the dock's not working. I'm going to pop that out. Okay, sorry. The dock wasn't working on OBS. Okay, now I've got back to where the questions were in a live chat. I've added in timestamps. Not sure why the dock had decided to stop working. Excellent. I was going to say this, reflection of Japanese infrastructure, wasn't it? The Japanese are putting only 3 or 4 cruisers per class. The British and Americans are 10 plus cruisers per class. Depends on which class you're talking about. But yeah, the British and the town, and once the British have settled on a class they like, they really do go for them. Same with the Americans. It's once you've got a class you like, you've got a design pattern you like, you go for it. It's the first couple you build a few and then you go for it. Yamato 8125. I have a question about the Japanese Imperial Navy. Why does Japan always lose? Not really. They win some of them. Oh no, it's one of those command structures. It's a bit like Philippines. No one really knows sure who's in charge of the Japanese, where the Americans know who is in job. Yes. I've got a question about Japanese Marine. Why they seem to have a tendency to hit their own ships between them, Midway being another example. Again, it's command and control, and it's actually checking. In the nicest way, it's officers like Asugi who just basically go, I want to kill the enemy! Boom, boom, boom! Oh, frigate, I just smashed into one of my own ships. Is there a poodle trying to gain entry? Because doing research on the Imperial Japanese government military has completely changed my worldview on history. Potentially. Yamato 8125, seppuku, potentially. For him. True believers, paragons, that's always options on them. Just devotees of the 442 and send. This class was the battle was the Cleveland class fragment. It was a good battle for the Cleveland class. They really do show their skills. Japan does win battles, and yeah, I have sorted out the chat and got back to the chat. For some reason, it had logged me out of the chat. I'm not quite sure how or why, but it had logged me out. I know, I've seen you. You're sort of the question now, Yamato. I have now got the questions. I have now. My chat is now working. I just realised chat hadn't moved for 20 minutes, and I was going. My chat's not always. My chat's not quite a Drakenfeld chat, but usually it's got some pace to it. It doesn't usually sit there for 20 minutes, and I'm going, what the frigate's happened? I'm going to have to watch this, because obviously, I think OBS occasionally has joys with the whole satellite infrastructure, but it is getting better. It's one of the things I've noticed is that even in the last month, when I've been testing to now using it for this, it has been getting better. But I would also add in the UK, if you are considering Starlink, if you are considering it, you can get the basic one, or you can get the mobile one. Or if you're on, I've got the mobile one because of course I'm not using it for I'm not using it primarily for home. It's a backup for home, but it's for when I go wandering around the country and I'm staying in, or family staying in lodges like this. I can set them up and they have decent internet. That's 85 quid a month, and you pay in advance, but you can pay by the month, so it's sensible. Let's see which. Do you know which side of the Imperial Court these officers were? East or West Court? Honestly, Injuin, I forget which side he is, but he's the same side as Prince Hirohito. No, it's... Yeah, he's the same side as Prince Fushimi Hiroyasu. Sorry, Hirohito. I'm not sure why I decided to go with that prince, but it's Prince Fushimi Hiroyasu. He's the same side as. Asugi is very much of the faction that almost actually agree with sections of the army in terms of wanting to fight on, and very much the leadership of Japan in World War II. And Omori is part of Yamata's group. But I'm not sure if I would call them East or West Court. They're all the factions are all so splintered. It's difficult to rank them up into just two. I say, as we're talking, Jane, would you consider the Combined Fleet website a more reliable source on energy and warships? It depends. It's a good site. I have used it, but and the advantage is it does have an author, which I like, and means you can quote it. But I would also say it's kind of like what I know will be leveled at me by people by academics when some of my academic colleagues. Some won't, but some academic colleagues will level this at me when I do my self-publishing books. In that it'll be a case of, well, yeah, but it's all your own work, and you don't have to go through the hoops of other people checking it before you do it. So it's completely open to your own biases and views, and you don't have anyone to check that. And it's true, but it can still provide a good content. Yamato 8125. What was the reason why the Japanese Navy was so behind in their radar technology? I would say this. The Japanese aren't behind in their radar technology. They are different, but also they have a far less of an ability to turn it into a mass manufacture. If you consider Britain's capabilities in World War II, they already have existing manufacture prior to World War II. They have some mass manufacture going on. They spread it out to Canada and various other places as well. So they're able to build systems. But really, they're, whilst they're being bombed, etc., that's a big limitation on British in terms of Britain in terms of being able to manufacture these really high tech pieces of equipment, because of the fact that that core of personnel doing that, you also have to deal with the fact of infrastructure being attacked. The Americans are able to, of course, build without being attacked. So they start off with a pre-war infrastructure base and they grow it. The Japanese have less of a pre-war infrastructure base because they are still developing theirs to an extent. Their radar does have some interesting ideas, and Trent Telenko and there's a group he belongs to. We did some videos, discussions with him on the Billitrams podcast series with Jamie Seedell and Clarke. And there is a lot of interesting stuff going on in Japanese radar at this time. And we know there is a lot of interesting stuff going on in Japanese radar. But the fact is, the Japanese aren't able to turn it into a mass of systems. It's basically, it comes back to Japan's biggest weakness is infrastructure. I would say the biggest lesson and legacy of Japan you can see is in their, still to this day, obsession with their railway infrastructure. And I would argue that a lot of that is that based on their World War II and pre-war experience of what happens to a nation which doesn't have good solid infrastructure, linking itself together and allowing it to move goods around, and especially people around and skills around. So, how did the battle come to be? Well, as mentioned, there had been these landings taking place. And the Japanese 17th Army was superior in numbers to the 3rd Marine Division, but they were concentrated on sites in the north and the south of the island. And so what the 3rd Division did was pretty much land in Augusta Bay, which was pretty much in... Oh, how do I put this politely? Empress Augusta Bay is not quite in the middle of the island, but it's not far off it. It's about as close to the middle as you can get and find a reasonable place to land. But it's not quite perfectly in the middle. So that means they've immediately split up the superior Japanese 17th Army, and the 17th Army is now stuck and it can't go anywhere and it can't share its supplies. And so they can use one regiment to block, which is what they did do, while the other regiments go and fight one part of the army, and then so forth. The Marines, while they were landing, were being backed up by Task Force 39, which is, of course, Merrill's force. They're there to provide fire support. They're also there to deal with any sea threat coming along, but that's why they don't have really any aircraft carriers, because honestly, they don't really need that support at this point. The air attacks that the Japanese are trying to send are all coming from Naval. They're all coming from a decent enough distance away that there are other things which are going to deal with them, and there are land-based aircraft from nearby from the American forces which can come and support. And Omori is sent out, and his aim is to achieve the same success as they achieved at the Battle of Savo Island. And that had taken place, of course, in August 1942. So we're not talking about that long ago. We're talking about a little over a year ago, the Japanese had had a massive success. And the idea was to carry this out again. They grabbed the ships they had available, which you can tell from the command structure that's involved. They grabbed the senior officers they had available, which you can tell from the mess that it became. And you can tell that also from the way they organized them, because you have, you know, you have it divided up as destroyers and the light cruisers, and it's a mess. It's a mess of structure, really. And they are being sent against what is almost a picked prime force. Merrill is an accepted expert in ship fighting and surface actions. He has already done the Battle of Blackett Threat. He has done all sorts of things. He really knows what he's doing. He's got Burke with him. He's got Austin with him. Desron 23 and Cruiser Division 12. These are forces which you do not want to come against. They've been trained together for a while now. They have been operating together for a while together now. They know each other. This is the complete antithesis of what the Japanese force represents. Yamato 125. The Aijin tried to search for the side battle and they were never found. There's a problem with the Kantai-Kessen doctrine, and I've done some videos about it, in that there's almost more of an obsession from historians and people looking back at the Kantai-Kessen than there was from the Japanese perspective. There was a bit of an obsession going on there, but it wasn't quite as permissive as we like to sort of think. And it's the 31 knot book. 31 knot. At least that's what I'm going. That's what I'm going with on this video. There are various things. There's even one person who wrote to me and said, "Actually, it's the 41 knot Burke," and I'm going, frigate. The books I've read have so far mostly said 31 knot Burke, so that's what I'm going with. Now, the Japanese force is heading. Never eat shadow wheat. Southeast, roughly. And they're going that way around the world. Yes, so southeast. Because yeah, southeast. I said southwest in Long Patrol, and I got it wrong. It's southeast. To Torokina, Cape Torokina, and as they were sailing, they were cruising. They weren't going maximum speed; they were cruising. The Americans were, while they started sailing, the Americans were already in the process of withdrawing their most of the landing craft, pretty much the troop transports, and pretty much everything else they could from there. The transports departed at 1800 hours. 4 cargo vessels, which were still being unloaded, remained, but the 12 transports have already gone. The US mine-laying forces, which were putting in some new defences off Cape Malta, were also withdrawn. And the history of the island is kind of easy to see once you hear it's Cape Malta. And at the same time as that's going on, US reconnaissance aircraft have already detected Omri's force. At which point, Merrill goes, woohoo! Because he can leave shelling the Japanese positions around Booker in northern Bougainville and sail north around Vella Lavella. I will never get, I always seem to have trouble with that name, to intercept. And he's departing at roughly just before midnight on the 1st, 2nd November. So, about 80 years and a couple of days ago to our time. The thing is, again, they're moving faster than the Japanese are, because the Japanese ships have mostly not been able to have the maintenance and infrastructure needed to maintain their pre-war cruising speed. Sometimes you can maintain your top speed for short bursts and still keep that, but your cruising speed suffers more than your top speed in terms of maintenance and infrastructure. And that is a thing for the Japanese. Their cruising speed suffers a lot more than everything else. Rabaul is a mixture of our Japanese army and navy. Rabaul is a complete another hodgepodge. It's got everything there. And it's multiple factions warring against each other as well. It's fun. It makes, honestly, it makes the court around General MacArthur look positively civilized and urbane and polite, rather than vaguely Machiavellian and Byzantine as it was. Now, the thing is, the Americans get there first. They are roughly positioning themselves across Augusta Bay, and they've got their 4 destroyers in 2 divisions of destroyers, a division either side of pretty much their cruisers. So they're not sailing in that different a formation than their Japanese counterparts. But the difference is, the middle is 4 very, very good light cruisers, which are pretty much the same size as the Japanese heavy cruisers, but are armed with a humongous number of radar-guided 6-inch guns, i.e. 12 each. That's enough to cause trouble to anyone who's thinking of anything. And we are talking the full radar suites. We're talking SK1, 2, SG6, and all the fire control systems they can have. The Mark 34 gunnery fire control system for the main, and Mark 37s for their secondaries. These are well worked up ships. Now, the thing is, it doesn't start with a shipping engagement. The battle starts at 01:30 hours on the 2nd November. Why? Because Haguru, yes, Haguru, which, if you think about it, is one of the 2 heavy cruisers. So the core ships in the center of the Japanese force is hit by a torpedo from an American aerial attack, an aircraft attack. I think it's a torpedo in this one. I'm just going to check because my notes helpfully skip a page. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. In 1943, yes, I think she is. Yeah, she takes light damage, but she's not actually massively damaged. I think it's a torpedo or there's a debate as to whether it's a torpedo or a bomb. Because I've got an asterisk on my own notes which said it could be a bomb, but the source I was reading said it was a torpedo. I'm really annoyed I left that book at home now. Oh well, life happens. So, Haguru is unlucky. Whatever happens, in the nicest way, it doesn't matter whether it's hit by a bomb or a torpedo, it's in the middle of the formation. The flanking forces should have been assisting. But they're pretty much proceeding under their own groupings at this point. And that's the trouble. So she is reduced in speed, and this affects the entire formation because they're supposed to be working together. However, not everyone listens to their senior officer and not everyone reduces speed. The USN task force makes radar contact at 02:27 hours. So, roughly an hour later, Merrill dispatches his force into 3 columns. He sends Burke's Division 45 to attack the Japanese northern flank, and he sends Austin's Division 46 to attack the southern flank of the Japanese force. and he turns his cruisers so that they can remain out of Japanese torpedo range, but still fire at them. Amazing! A US naval officer worrying about Japanese torpedoes. Whatever next. Now, Burke leads Division 45 forward and at 02:46 hours, so 19 minutes, roughly, fires a salvo towards the Japanese. Sendai led the division. Now, Sendai, of course, is the cruiser which is being commanded by Baron Matsuchi Ijuin. Respond, and they fire 8 torpedoes as well. Both sides detect the attacks coming in, and both groups manage to avoid the torpedoes. But basically, the Americans launched their torpedoes at the destroyers and light cruisers. The Japanese launched their torpedoes and destroyers, and both missed. However, here is the problem for the Japanese. In the confusion, their 3 groups separate completely. They've already been had trouble because of one commander not slowing down. I wonder who that was when he was supposed to. And they've already broken up a bit because of that. And now this attack, they have basically broken up. So now they are pretty much 3 separate groups. Which is the worst thing you can have happen in a night fight. Because that means who do you know? You don't know who you're fighting against. And that comes back to hurt them. Now, at this point, Des Division 46 is given the all clear by Merrill to do their attack. Unfortunately, USS Foote, which was part of them, interprets the command, which is to basically to break and assume torpedo attack position, as breaking the other way. And as can always happen at night time, Foote basically is unable to effectively rejoin the fight at this point, as she's in danger of colliding with the other enemy ships, because she keeps wandering around the battle trying to get back with her division, and keep running into other ships and stopping, not wanting to get into a fight with her own side. So at around 02:50 hours, when it's worked out that Des Div 45's torpedo attack hadn't worked, and hadn't achieved complete surprise, the American cruisers opened fire. They focused their firing on the Sendai, whose rudder promptly jams. Oh, sugar, this is getting worse. At this point, the Samadair, which had fired her torpedoes, decided to collide with her sister ship, the Shiratsu, a namesake of the class, and so both of those are forced to retire from the battle. Samadair receiving 5-inch hits at 0300 hours, but basically they are trying to withdraw from the battle. At the same time, Miyoko collides with Hatsukaze, slicing off her bows. I'll get into why that happened in a bit. Miyoko gets damaged from this. So now you've had both heavy cruisers damaged, and Haguru was hit by cruiser shells. Hey! Excuse me a second. What's going on outside? I'll be back in a second. Sorry, that is a corgi protesting that his brother is going out for walkies. It's over. He's already been, before you think he's not benefit, he's already been for his, and when this is over this evening, I'll be taking them both out again as well, so. But he's still going to complain. Right then. What it does that to become visible to public's primary crew farming? No, far worse. They're going out for walks in turn. And they're worried, you know, the corgi might get different treatment than the poodle. They know it. So, at this point, the Japanese start to get into real trouble. So they've had 2 heavy cruisers damaged. Haguru's been hit by cruiser shells as well. But only a few of those shells have actually detonated. So 6-inch shells are raining down on her, but not all of them are detonating. And then one of the things realised is that it's because of... Excuse me a second. I'll go see if I can deal with corgi. Hello, you back? Yeah. Hello. Tactical. Tactical. Up. Tactical. Sit. Good boy. Stay. And no bopping me on the head. Oi, Kuruma. We will have this all sorted out by the time we do I do this tomorrow. Sit. Sit. Lie down. Good boy. So, what's the big problem? Well, the thing is, despite the fact that there are only a few of those shells detonating, they're all doing damage. They're all doing damage, and these ships are relying on visual tracking of their targets. Remember, the Japanese have very advanced night visual aids. They have very good systems for night visual operations. They're just not as good as radar. They're as advanced as you can imagine, but they're not as good as radar. And the Japanese cruisers actually do, though, manage to pinpoint the American cruisers and start firing back at them at 03:13 hours. Pretty much they're doing this by spotting the flashes of their guns. And at various points, the heavy cruisers actually fire torpedoes at Cruiser Division 12. This is where you start to have some really interesting facts enter place, because the flashes from the guns from Cruiser Division 12, some of them are mistaken for torpedo hits. And actually, the torpedoes had all missed their targets. So Omori is reported at 03:27 hours that he scored hits, that his cruisers have managed to hit the enemy cruisers with their torpedoes. Now, yeah, basically, this live's replacing the Thursday live due to the tech issues. And Gemma match, corgis are quite spoiled. Oh, trust me, they are. Corgis and poodles are both, you know, you're both spoiled, aren't you? You fluffy beast. Yeah. If we zoom out again. Yeah, this is where the poodle is now back in his position. Very happily so. Yes, the 5th night is the big night for fireworks in the UK. 4th is fairly big as well this year, because it's a Saturday closest to the 5th, and most people like to go out on Saturday night rather than the 5th. So, what is happening in the American fleet? Well, not everything's going the American ways. They do have radar, but things are issues. Spence and Thatcher, which, remember, Spence and Thatcher are also in Destroyer Division 46. You know, that sort of small issue going on there. So the Destroyer Division 46 is lost foot, and Spence and Thatcher now decide to add to their own issues. Their own issues are they collide, but they're able to continue the battle. They collide but manage to organize it. At this point, Foote is actually struck by a torpedo, which blows off the stern of the ship, because again, she was trying to get back in formation, and getting back in formation, she managed to miss a torpedo and gets her stern blown off. This left 19 dead and 17 wounded. And it all comes from a small mistranslation of a communication right at the beginning of the battle. Just a minor error. And you've had Foote basically not being part of the battle for the entire engagement. So she spends the rest of the engagement staying afloat and fighting off enemy aircraft attacks. Now here's where we have some interesting things going on. Now, the Japanese are of course using visual identifications. One of the reasons they're doing this is they have aircraft dropping flares to illuminate the targets, as well as firing star shells. So you have snooper aircraft dropping flares, you have the ships firing star shells. So actually the snooper aircraft, and when we say snooper aircraft, we basically mean Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. The Americans often categorize them as snooper aircraft. They're reconnaissance aircraft. They're normally, you know, converted torpedo bomber types out there dropping flares which have long range. And kind of like what the British were doing in the Battle of Taranto. If you consider the attack on Taranto, the British have some of the swordfish are flying around dropping flares. And they're literally illuminating the battle space for the attacking aircraft. That's why they're dropping those flares. So they can see when they're coming into attack. So it's sort of similar to daytime, and the Italians are lit up from behind, silhouetting their positions and making it harder for the Italians to see the swordfish coming in. Well, it's similar is going on here. And the Japanese actually managed to, well, their aircraft managed to illuminate Cruiser Division 12. This point, Denver receives roughly 3 8-inch hits, which all fail to detonate between 0320 and 0325. You suddenly think, hang on, these shells are all proving pretty bad on both sides here, because there are 6-inch shells which are failing to detonate, and there are 8-inch shells failing to detonate. Well, you have to remember, shells are not really are a very precise science, but their hitting the targets is not always a precise science, and if they hit at slightly wrong angles, they can fail to go off, or they can be deflected. If their detonators are not primed properly before they're fired, they can fail to go off if they've not been set properly. And if there's been a muck-up in manufacture, they can fail to go off. All these things can be factors. But the Americans still pushed on. In fact, at this point, Spence and the rest of the cruisers were... how do I put this politely? Well, Spence is actually Destroyer Division 46. Yes, Spence. Sorry. I've got my notes running parallel because the 3 units of American forces and what they're doing. And I jumped into Spence and then called her a cruiser. She's a destroyer. Sorry. It's far easier in math this time. Destroyer Division 46 starts closing with some Japanese destroyers which have congregated into the centre. They are a mixture of ships which are damaged, ships which don't know what they're doing. They're just, forming something. And Spence, which was leading the Destroyer Division 46, is actually hit by an 8-inch shell on the waterline. But that shell fails to go up. At this point, Japanese fire is getting increasingly accurate. And so, the American cruisers maneuver behind a smokescreen, helpfully put up for them, which stops the Japanese gunnery, because if you can imagine how it makes daytime events, imagine what it does on nighttime. But of course, American gunnery, which is using radar fire control, isn't bothered and carries on firing. At this point, the American destroyers realize that they have been really having trouble with their IFF systems. And that night fighting needs to work on their IFF systems, because they haven't realized, they haven't worked out that stray signals and random signals from the enemy can interfere with your IFF. At this point, in this development of it. And it's at this point they realize, so only later they realized that Div 46 had a theoretical chance to torpedo the center group of Japanese ships because of uncertain identification. It's always a theoretical, it's always going back in hindsight going, well, in hindsight, you were here, they were there, so you could have torpedoed them. But we weren't sure at that point, so if we torpedoed them, we could have been torpedoing our own cruisers. And so we didn't, because we were going off radar. Well, you know, it's the case of, in hindsight, you can go, that was a chance you should have taken. Yes, because in hindsight, you know exactly what that would have been we'd have been hitting. But in practice, we didn't know what we would have been hitting, and if it had been our own cruisers and we wiped them out, that would have been really, really silly. It would kind of change the entire context of this battle from being a victory for the Americans to kind of being a loss if they lose 4 cruisers due to their own torpedoes. They're getting fairly close range, but they're still not really within visual range for night fighting. By 03:37 hours, Omri basically believes that he sunk a heavy cruiser and felt he was going to be caught in daylight by US carrier aircraft. So, ordered a retreat. He felt he'd sunk a heavy cruiser. There's no American heavy cruiser anywhere near this battle. They're all light cruisers, but, you know. At this point, though, while he's trying to run away, Merrill's closing to bombard the Japanese forces, and he engages Hatsukaze at roughly 16 kilometers, or 17,500 yards. Strange enough, they didn't score any hits. Around 0400 hours, Desron 23, or rather the remaining vessels from Destroyer Divisions 45 and 46 who have combined together, decide to get involved in a melee with some Japanese stragglers, and we will call it a melee because it does look like a swashbuckling medieval tournament joust, and they manage to confirm the sinking of the Sendai and drive off the remaining Northern Group ships. At 0413 hours, Spence, being a typical destroyer, at this point decides to lose speed because the water in the fuel line, and so falls out of formation. And, well, the Americans keep hitting their contacts, but they don't seem to be sinking them. At this point, some of the ships from Destroyer Division 45 spot the limping Spence, think she's a Japanese ship, and fire on her. Luckily, they cause no damage, and they realise their mistake before they fire too many times. At which point, Spence links up with Cruiser Division 12 and decides to engage a Japanese straggler. Unfortunately, for the cruisers, they're not sure which is the straggler and which is the Spence, so they cease engaging. At which point, Destroyer Division 45 comes back from their, joint sort of Desron 23 operation, and aids Spence, because she almost ran out of ammunition by this point, and they find out that the straggler is the Hatsukaze, which was heavily damaged. But I haven't told you how she was heavily damaged. At which point she explodes and sinks. The daylight pursuit is broken off, and the ships, low on fuel and ammunition, are ordered to rendezvous with the Foot, as Mera wanted to stop his ships being attacked by air and wanted to get them home. What happened then? Well, the Japanese mounted a heavy air attack of roughly 100 aircraft, launching from Rabaul. But these were fought off with US and New Zealand shore-based aircraft, in another scenario which might give you an idea of what could have happened if shore-based aircraft if they'd realised fighters were available, that not the whole no, there's no aircraft available, only a supply to strike aircraft for 4C, because those shore-based aircraft, with the defences of the ships, managed to fight off the attacks of the enemy aircraft, and whilst the Japanese score some hits on Montpellier, Foot is successfully towed to Tulagi and no ships are lost. So, what happened to Hatsukaze? What happened to Hatsukaze? Well, you see, I did mention there was a bit of an imbecile wandering around. And that is Morikazu Osugi. When I say imbecile, I don't mean that in the rudest way. I mean that in the he is so aggressive, he is not taking notice of what else is going on around him kind of way. The moment he sighted some US cruisers, he turned all his ships at maximum speed without waiting for orders and charged them. He didn't notice the flagship was behind him. He didn't know that what they were maneuvering. He took no notice of what the rest of the Japanese forces were doing. And that had, in fact, what they'd done was an arc towards the east and were then returning towards the west, sort of traverse to his own moves. And shortly after 0300 hours on 2nd November, as mentioned, Miyoko rams Hatsukaze, and Wakatsuki had to perform a maneuver to avoid Haguro. This is all done because he leads his forces right in front of his own heavy cruisers. Okay? He leads his light cruiser, he leads those forces into that, and they end up bashing in because of his instructions. He is aboard the Agano, and that's his flagship. His destroyers are Wakatsuki, Hatsukaze, and Nagani, and they are some of the best destroyers available to the Japanese forces. And he literally throws them away, smashing into his own heavy cruisers. Now, he then orders another torpedo attack because he wants to attack the Americans, but decides to cancel it once he finds that the vessel that he's probably going to attack is Haguro. Which was between the two unharmed destroyers of his formation and the US line because of the position he managed to get himself into. He notes the states of Hatsukaze without a bow, and decides he can't save it, so leaves it, and follows Miyoko and Haguro, which were heading south. It was dark is a good thing to say for him. But no, it's basically the command and control just breaks down. So what have the Japanese lost? The Japanese have lost a large destroyer. They have lost a light cruiser. They have a heavy cruiser damaged, another light cruiser damaged, and 2 more destroyers heavily damaged. The Americans have a light cruiser damaged and 2 destroyers damaged. I'd say that's enough to say it's a victory for the Americans, but the fact is, the Americans had landed their forces pretty much before the Japanese even showed up, and the Japanese didn't even manage to get to it. So yeah, that was not a good battle for the Japanese. That really wasn't. I know. I will do it. I will do as I promised. I promised it to you, and I will do it. Okay. Sorry. Someone just reminding me that he's still ready to go for a longer trip than he got. What are you going to do when I go? When I'm off travelling? I do not know. Who are you gonna nag then? So, this is Operation Cartwheel. This is the grand plan for the South Pacific, and to an extent the Southwest Pacific. And as you notice, there is a sort of a clear division going on here in terms of forces and approach. In that, if you do not have the forces doing what Halsey's doing, then MacArthur would be in severe trouble. But also, you need MacArthur's forces for Halsey to be able to get ahead. And this battle is part of that. This battle is a part of grinding down the Japanese, pushing them forward. Every ship they lose in this sort of battle, every troop, a soldier they lose in this sort of battle, every good senior officer whose career is destroyed because they don't achieve the glorious results demanded by the Japanese High Command. The reason the light cruisers were with the destroyers is because the Japanese preferred to use light cruisers as squadron leaders for destroyers. And one of the reasons is, of course, you have a rear admiral and a rear admiral staff. So you need the space. Whereas, if you think about it, the British and Americans tend to have their flotilla commanders are captains and commanders, so they don't get quite the same staff. Now, some people point out to me that the Japanese were preparing their forces for rapid expansion. They were. And having those rear admirals in those positions does enable you to have rapid expansion. Does enable you to heavy things up and to put in that force and grow things. But it's also a problem in that you might be able to grow things rapidly, but for doing that you have to have the infrastructure to grow the things rapidly. If you don't have the ships, and you're never going to have the ships. Now, this is every experienced pilot and experienced aircraft maintenance crew. Yes. For the Japanese, their problem is they're expanding to give themselves depth to force the Americans to deploy decisive forces. And what they don't realize the Americans can do with their infrastructure is deploy overwhelming forces without ever committing decisive forces. And by decisive forces, the Japanese are looking for the Americans to commit a major proportion of their entire battle forces, their entire naval force, to a battle. They have some chances for this. So if you consider the available American forces that are deployed at Midway, etc., that is your chance for it. But the Japanese, in return, aren't responding for that. And that would be the Kantai-Kessen doctrine. Why is that not going on? Because the Kantai-Kessen is not about that. The Japanese are looking for the first phase. They're looking for their attrition phase of their war. And that's what their expansion is all about. Their expansion force is all about attriting the Americans. And the thing is, that works if you have a short war and if the Americans charge in stupid. If you can goad the Americans into doing something that's really harebrained and stupid, like charging with all their forces in December 1941 straight across the Pacific towards the Japanese home islands, going straight to the end of their logistics line, going straight into everything, chucking everything to charge and attack Tokyo Bay. Yeah, you can probably attrit them, especially if they after they start losing ships, if they don't fall back, if they just keep on going and oh, we've lost some ships, no worry, keep going, lost some ships, keep going, that will work. Trouble is, that's relying on your enemy being a complete and utter moron. And so they are left with a lot of territory to defend, which requires forces to defend it. And once you've captured it for the imperial grandeur, you can't just let it go. Once you have captured all this territory, you can't let it go. You can't surrender it. You can't abandon it. So you have to defend it, and that means you have to sacrifice your own forces. So what they end up doing to themselves is treating themselves by their own hubris and their own plans. Because they expose themselves to death by 1,000 cuts. This area is prime submarine hunting area. This area is prime attack area. And that's it. That's what they're hitting at. That's what they've created for themselves. They've taken territory which they have to defend. And they have to defend against a force which is going to build itself up. We're talking about 1943 at this point. 2 years into the war, pretty much. Well, yeah, pretty much 2 years into the war, because it's November 1943, and so December 1941. Yeah, it's near enough 2 years. The Americans are now almost at the level of producing enough destroyers that they are pretty much producing the destroyer equivalent of the Japanese destroyer force, at least in terms of tonnage, if terms not complete numbers, almost concurrently. The sheer amount of resources available to Britain and America, and the whole of the Allies, versus the Japanese at sea is horrendous. And the only reason the Japanese haven't been completely boot-stomped is because the Allies are also fighting in the Mediterranean and fighting in the North Atlantic. And they're fighting in the Indian Ocean. They're all over the place, and they're having to defend a whole lot of territory as well. But they are slowly doing it. The biggest nail in the Japanese coffin is the moment the Italians switch sides. Because that means suddenly the British don't need to worry about forces from the Mediterranean. You add in Hitler's decision after the Battle of North Cape to abandon his heavy fleet units and basically just use them as mobile flak batteries and defense guns. And frankly, he frees up the Royal Navy to start channeling forces as quickly as they can once D-Day and various supplies are over, channeling heavy forces out into the Pacific Fleet. And the moment the British Pacific Fleet is formed, that's basically kind of, oh great, we're already being stomped by one of you, now we're getting the other one as well. Hello, Stafford. What does this battle show? Well, this battle shows is to me is a tipping point. It's one of those tipping points, and it really does illustrate is that the Japanese, the cohesion and the force structure which they managed to attain at the beginning of World War II, at the beginning of their entry into World War II, has long since gone. That cohesion, that structure, had in many ways compensated for the issues they have in terms of their manufacture infrastructure, because whilst they have a very good scientific base and they have a very good ability to work out things and develop things, they don't have enough of the ability to turn those things into manufactured items. So there is a level and there is an infrastructure level required to take something from, we have this on paper, we have this experimental version of this in a lab, we have a testbed model, we have tested to an extent in the field, to we have this in manufacture and we in production and we have it in usage. I have talked before about the Italians. They are another good example of this. The Italians and the Japanese are in many ways very similar in that they can produce very, very fine pieces of equipment, absolutely exquisite pieces of equipment. But the trouble is their ships are kind of like supercars. They are not designed for mass manufacture. They are absolutely exquisite items, but they do not have the infrastructure, industry, nor the tendency to design them for mass manufacture at this point. Why? Because due to their infrastructure, by the time they've started building the second batch of them, they'll have plans for an even more exquisite and improved version. Put another way, each destroyer generation in the Italian Navy is kind of like this year's muscle car, i.e. the 68 Chevy versus the 69 Chevy. Hang on, that's not muscle cars. Chevys? They are muscle cars, aren't they? Sorry, I'm having a mild brain fart over cars, which is usually something which is a fairly interesting, because that's one of my topics, which is sort of my relaxation topics, is to read about cars and to occasionally muck around with car engines, and my brain's currently going with, yeah. Admittedly, I've had an interesting 3 days, over the last 3 days, driving the family to here in the storm that's been hitting the UK, but yeah, broadly speaking, it was mainly roadworks which caused me trouble. Hello, Stafford. Chevy's are muscle cars. That's good. That's good. My brain wasn't completely wrong. It wasn't going off too weird. And by the way, if anyone's wondering why I'm not wearing a poppy, I have this. I have this. I have all sorts of poppy stuff around this year, but I haven't yet found a metal poppy for 2023, and I get the metal ones. Mainly because if I ever have the paper ones, I end up... I've been known when lecturing to send them flying, so I get the metal badge ones, and I haven't found one. Sure, you're not thinking of hand-built Ferraris. Oh, there are some. Yes, but the trouble is the Ferraris don't tend to produce a new version of them every year. That's why I was going for the muscle cars. Cosmos, how many hobbies do you have? Oh. Again, functioning insomniac. So let's see. I have a lot. I have a lot. Let's just say that. Let's just say quite a lot of my hobbies, I will admit, are hobbies you can do alone. And it does depend on the car I have, how much car work I can do. Subarus, I could always muck around with, especially the Subarus I tend to buy. And my very first Vauxhall was one I could muck around with. The Volvos are slightly more built in, but they are safer for family travel. So if I'm moving around with family, I prefer to have a Volvo. So now, if I have to if I've got to get a new to me car, and I'm looking up at the immediate future, and I've got a lot of family movements, I tend to go for a Volvo. Hence, I have a V40 right now. But if I look like I'm going to be just driving myself around a bit, and I can tinker it, I have time to tinker with it, I get a Subaru, because I can tinker with those. I like rally cars. They've always been more... rally cars have always been more my style than any other form of fast car, really. So, questions. And tonight's is not going to be as long as it normally is, and I'm not going to be on Discord this evening. Mainly because it's a Saturday night, and because I'm still sorting out this place and unpacking stuff. Hopefully it's going to help my monitors to get better. Hopefully putting down here for a month is going to help them get better. But as said, I'm going to be going backwards and forwards. So, yeah, if you consider next weekend, I'm up in London actually at a speaking event. The dinner I'm speaking at. To talk about World War I and remembrance. So, yeah. I've got a full November, and I added this to my plate as well. I'm silly. It's nice. It's nice. It's, you know, it's a nice place. It has a hot tub, so there might be some more hot tub videos filmed while I'm here. Again, I do like being in my office, though. I do like my office down the garden. It is quieter. I'm not looking forward to it when I'm recording videos. If I'm recording videos here and my sister is teaching from here. Why hasn't the Mikasa been reused by the AJ in post-retirement or the JSM MSDF? Honestly, because there are issues with doing that, and there are also the ship. If how do I put this? Because of the relationship between the 6-6 plan and the first Sino-Japanese War and various other things, there are some touchstones which the Japanese have chosen not to touch and not to step on. In the interwar years, they had newer, more modern ships, and they were always looking forward to the future. And up until recently, they've avoided things with the modern JMS ADF, etc., and the way things are going. There might be some association link to it, but honestly, the Japanese haven't pushed for that. They haven't needed that scenario. She could be their equivalent quite easily of Victory and well, Victory really, but and of course the Constitution, but actually doing that, actually pushing that through, would be a big political thing in Japan. Lions, do you know if the US got their cruisers in the secondary battery range? At certain points, they do seem to be in secondary range, but they tried to keep in 6-inch range because they wanted because Mills wanted to A, take advantage of their fire control, but B, also avoid enemy torpedoes. And if he knew if he kept to 6-inch gun range, he could avoid enemy torpedoes. Actually, do you have any ship models? Yes, I have lots of model ships and lots of model tanks and planes I've built over the years. A huge number of them sitting in the garage at home around my model railways. Yeah, that's some of my hobbies. Building my own computers, that's a hobby. Collecting rather large amount of books is a hobby. Occasionally doing some rally driving is a hobby. Yeah, I have too many of them. That's why, honestly, whenever Drak and the other and Dan suggest I also get into HEMA, I look at them and go, it's tempting, but I'm not sure I have time for that as well. Do you, for SMG, have you seen any Target Newfoundland rally videos on YouTube? I don't think so. I don't think so. What have we got coming up? We have coming up next week unrotated projectiles to hypersonic missiles. That's going to be fun. I'm going to try and get these all recorded as soon as possible, basically. Because I'm starting in on the December videos, and the December list is looking massive. It really is. The Christmas to 2023 list has currently 174 videos on it, and spans from Saturday the 18th of November to January the 14th to Sunday the 14th of January. Speaking of side torpedoes, any record of using hydrophones on the sides? Well, I don't think the light Cleveland class carried them. I don't think they had them. And I don't think I think the space the destroyers were going at meant they weren't using them either. I'm not sure. The Japanese don't seem to mention it in their sources, but they might have. So honestly, I'm not sure on the Japanese. The Japanese also, the book I had, which I was using, I've left at home, so I can't even check that book. I do apologize. What I will do is I will do a Japanese books brew ships when I get home. In fact, what I will do now is I will go into my studio and I will make sure that a video, one of the brew ships coming up is going to be Japanese books, the Imperial Japanese Navy, so I can make sure I cover it, and so it's going to be listed in. Let's see. It's gonna be. Will have to be one in December. I don't want it to be that one because that one could have issues with timing. So 17th of December. Imperial Japanese Navy books. If you're following, you're seeing my videos, you'll notice that the lives, the video for Brew Ships 133 has changed to Imperial Japanese Navy books, and that's the 17th of December. So I'll make sure I go through the books then. I think I'm not sure who was her captain at this point, but I think you might be right. I think you might be right. I'm not 100% sure. Again, I'm really annoyed. The book I have, I've left at home, so I'm not going to be going. I'm thinking all right. On the question was from Jonas Finch. Hello. Was IJN Samadera skipped by Captain Hara? This battle, I remember from Japanese destroyer captain, IJN Samadera was considered a lucky ship, though a bit slow and old. Yeah, I think she was. But I think she was coming to my home. That's A for one. If you have an ABM system built and operational, the British would be wanting to replace it and maintain it. Because that's the capability you don't want to get rid of. Because even if it's not necessarily going to overwhelm a mass strike, if it can deal with individual or small scale threats and take them off the table, then it makes life a little bit easier and a little bit safer, and means that there is a threshold threat for enemies to deal with. Not sure what you're mentioning, Stafford, because I haven't seen. I might have. I've been doing all sorts of stuff for the last few days, so I might well have. That could well have skipped past me completely. What you're talking about. Excellent. Hey Mary is very tempting, but it clashes with Latin and Clarke Thursdays. Maybe in the summer. Hey Mary is a lot of fun, and the thing is, I used to do fencing at school, so I used to be a saberist. And so I love it when me and Drak get to review sword fighting books and go through them, and we try the sword techniques, and I do enjoy that. It's just, I know what nights of the week the HEMA Club gets together, and I know what I tend to do on those nights of the week. And yeah. No luck on that, Constantine. None at all. Applications are going in, but, I have got YouTube, I have got books, so I'm in better position than a vast majority of people who are having the issues I'm having. And with work. And I will find someone to take up those hours. It's annoying because, as I said, because of the way they booked it in, I had basically scheduled them in and given them the lion's share of the hours because they wanted to book it and sign a contract in August, and so I had. Instead of waiting for October like I normally do, and because normally you apply in August and September, and then you get interviewed or discussions if you already worked for them before and they already know you, and so they just go, yeah, we're hiring you again to do this, and then you sign a contract in October. So I sort of did it in August, signed it for, it's done, I don't have to worry about it, that's good. And then in October they changed their mind, so that's annoying. Professor Sal featured recently. I will go and check his videos, and I will talk about it in Brew Ships tomorrow, if it's after I've checked his videos. I think I think Zebedee is in a bad mood this evening. Judging by that. I have a feeling I know what's happened, because there is a certain thing that Zebedee finds very offensive. And it is occasionally my mother's walking stick late at night when he's half asleep and he suddenly sees it come out and he goes, and then he looks afterwards and goes, oh, sorry. So I'm guessing that's what just happened. I'm guessing half asleep he just suddenly saw a walking stick going past him. Ah, well. It's almost funny to see a dog who reacts again, and then it goes, sorry, I didn't mean to. Before you don't even have to tell them off, they tell themselves off. It's okay. But no, Scharnhorst lecture has been at the SI, but the Scharnhorsts are still coming. Let's see. The key ships. Let's see, key ships. It's this Friday is going to be. The schedule is the Asai, which is coming on next Friday. And then the Seydlitz is coming the Friday after that. And then I think Scharnhorst. Let me just check. The Scharnhorst, as in the World War II Scharnhorst. Everything Scharnhorst is upcoming for the 16th of November. And the Scharnhorst class, as in the what are the ships which served in World War II, they are scheduled according to my list for Key Ship Series 7, which is the one which is coming after 6. So that's the next batch. That's the one which is coming out over Christmas. Yeah. Because the last of Key Ship Series 6 will come out on the 17th of November. So Key Ship Series 7 starts... when does Key Ship Series 7 start? It starts on the 20th of November. And I think it's a 10 parser, so which one are they? They are part 4, so they're the 1st of December. Scharnhorst on part 1st of December. At the moment. We'll see how quickly I record them all. But they should be. They should be the 7 o'clock video on the 1st of December. There are going to be 3 videos coming out a day during the Christmas period. There are going to be the 0300 hours, which are going to be the common response videos for the Keyship series. There are, as I said, 54 of those scheduled. 58 of those scheduled. And then there's going to be 11 o'clock video, which is going to be the shorts. There are currently 7 series of those, which are questions, battle cruisers, Victorian battleships, hot top historian, World War I battleships, random naval facts, and World War II battleships. Do you mind not lying on my pillow? Yes, you do. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to lose that one. And then we have the 7 o'clock videos, which are as regularly going on. There will be, during that period, there are none of the, how do I put this? None of, from the 20th of November, there will be no Twitch stream videos appearing on the channel. They'll be all going into next year. I know. As I mentioned, Japanese engineering is based on the idea of the master engineer, but these engineers normally work in their own ships, therefore not set up for mass production. Tamashi Hira was at this battle. Ah. Thank you, Leslie. Well, A, that confirms exactly who was in command of the Samadare. And B, yeah, very much so. Ryu Peter Hypersonics. Any progress in my hyper question? Yeah. Yeah, that's... I'm researching that, so it's been as I said, I didn't think it would maybe make it into this week's brew ships because of what was going on this week. The next week's brew ships, quite potentially, because I'm going to have a lot of train journeys. So as long as I make it back here on time, it will be in it. And that depends on my cousins turning up on time at the other end. So I give them keys. And all sorts of... It's a fun thing going on. Anyway. Where are you off to? So you were lying... So you've gone and lied on my pillow. Which means I'm going to have to clean my pillow. And now you've gone and lied on the floor. Or are you just wandering around? Anyway. I'm off to sort out dogs. I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone, to being here. Thank you, John UK. Thank you, Javash. Thank you, Leslie Mitchell. Thank you, Carl Gasberg. Thank you, Stafford Thompson. Thank you, Cosdrazes, Verdun. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Lyons. Thank you, HMS Ford. Thank you, I'm sure, Runon. Thank you, Stephen Richards. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Constantinonis. Thank you, Yamato. Thank you, Francis Malato. Thank you, everyone who's been watching. Avus, Juicy Sushi. Thank you, George Newman. I realise it's your Saturday evening, so I wasn't expecting half the people to turn out who did. Thank you. Thank you, Timmy Locker. Thank you, Dunn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve Clarke. Thank you, John Shea, HMS Ford. Thank you. Albazaski, thank you. David Gordon, thank you. Ains Morrison, thank you. Joe Schmo, thank you. And thank you, Archman. And I'll see you tomorrow for brew ships. Starlink allowing. And also, I will try and do a Twitch stream tomorrow with Starlink allowing. Let's see if that one works. That's going to be fun. Well, of course, all these comments require... they imply I have a life as well. Let's see what we've got coming up. I still haven't updated this slide. I need to go to it. But I am looking forward to Operation Berlin, a failure of both sides. That's going to be a fun one. And the Battle of Sinop. That's going to be a good one. Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you, Rick Vasava. Thank you, everyone. Take care, and hope you enjoyed. Yeah, this has been this and most, if not all, of November's lives will be done via Starlink. A lot of the recordings, and a lot of the writing and preparation of stuff will be done via other means, and various hotel Wi-Fi's and home Wi-Fi. But a lot of the lives not all lives, will be by Starlink, because I'm going to try and be down here to check on Mum and Karen as much as I can do. Thank you very much, Sharon. Take care, and oh, Runon, you did enjoy spending the day clambering over BB62. That is very cool fun. Take care, Ron. Have fun. Doodles. So you hungry, Fluff? Let's see.